What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So with Final Fantasy 16 out on the PS5 and seemingly heading towards a PC release, hopefully soon, it seems that the game could actually be heading to other platforms after that, and this is coming from Yoshi P himself. We'll go over that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about Sega seemingly setting up another big-time remake, this one coming to us from the GameCube, PS2, and Xbox generation. And then we're also going to be talking about Apple versus the FTC, as this could change quite a bit when it comes to these closed-off platforms. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And of course, members for the channel do get Newswave early and ad-free. If you want to learn more about that, click the join button down below this video. And we're going to start today with Stellar Blade. That is coming up next month, and I'm interested in checking out what Shift Up has here for us with this action game. But we had that demo that just accidentally got released, pulled back, and now it is being officially released later on this week. We can see this over on the PlayStation blog, where they say Stellar Blade demo arrives March 29th. The demo takes place from the very beginning of the game when Eve, a member of the 7th Airborne Squad, is sent to Earth on a mission to reclaim the planet from the Nidaba up to the first boss fight. Now, this is one that will have its save data carry over to the full game when that comes out April 26th. So these are the kind of demos I like, where it's basically getting a head start on the game. They also mentioned they have a little surprise included for players who complete the first stage. So again, this is exciting stuff. March 29th, they even say at 10 a.m. Eastern time, you'll be able to download it and start playing. A pretty good way, I'd say, to cap off the work week. So look for Stellar Blade's demo to drop this Friday. Also, it looks like we have another Xbox controller coming up here pretty soon. And no, it's not that Sebel controller that has been leaked out from that FTC hearing where it's going to have advanced haptic feedback. This is a bit more straightforward and is more or less just a new themed controller. But D-Labs did have the scoop here, and they even did a recreation of it, which you can see. They did this in the Xbox Design Labs. They were able to match up Nocturnal Vapor, which is the title for it. Now, they say this will be releasing, or at least announced for pre-order, April 2nd, and the release date would be set for April 9th. As for that Sebel controller, they still are looking towards May of 2024. So we're not too far off from that one. And I think that's going to be, to me anyway, the controller to hold out for. I know we have a lot of these theme controllers coming out, but Sebel, I think, is one that will be a fairly substantial upgrade based on the things we saw in that slide with the direct-to-cloud connection, the advanced haptic feedback, that sort of thing. But I guess if you're looking for something like Nocturnal Vapor based on some of these images, shouldn't have to wait too much longer. In fact, I feel like Microsoft will probably announce that this week. Oh, and we do know that Jim Ryan is out, actually after this week at Sony, and it appears PlayStation Stars is doing something to celebrate the 30-plus year career for Jim Ryan at PlayStation. They have a figure that you can, here's the image for it, for PlayStation Stars. Something about having them, I guess, immortalize Jim Ryan as a figure in, I feel like an app that no one's really using is just, it's pretty funny. It's like, hey, you want to collect your favorite CEO at PlayStation? You can do that by, according to them, playing Gran Turismo 7, Destiny 2, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, The Last of Us Part 2, Marvel Spider-Man 2, or God of War Ragnarok. Log in and play any of these games that apparently, I guess they say, quote-unquote, supported, and you'll be able to get this Jim Ryan figure. You know, I'm curious, who out there is using PlayStation Stars like that? I never see anyone talk about it. I kind of forgot about it myself, but hey, if you want to collect Jim Ryan, you can do so. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Final Fantasy 16. Of course, it came out last year in June, and there was some mixed reception to it, mostly because Final Fantasy pretty much embraced just being an action game at that point, with very little reliance on sort of the character progression and RPG elements that it came up with. But still, I think it was at least an interesting title to go through, and I had a lot of fun on the 45 to 46 hours or so playthrough that took me to get all the way through it. And now they, of course, have the DLC with Rising Tide coming up here pretty soon. But the discussion around this has been, okay, when is it going to make the move to other platforms? PC, we know, is coming up here pretty soon. But what about on maybe the Xbox? Well, this is actually from an interview with Noisy Pixel and Yoshi P, as well as some of the other developers there. We can see this posted up, where they say it's not over in the sense that we have the PC version. Once the PC version is released, we're thinking about hopefully moving to other platforms, again, platforms as well. Hopefully that's not really talking about the story, it's more about moving it onto different platforms. So there is a sense that while the project's still going, there is not that sense of being sad and having to leave them yet, but I'm pretty sure that once everything is released and we've moved on to the next project, that will be the time where it kind of hits us that, oh, it's over. So in this instance, Final Fantasy 16 isn't necessarily going to retain the same team like we see with 7, where that has the trilogy going on, and one of the big reasons they were able to get Rebirth out just like less than 4 years after Remake, according to them, was because they were able to retain 80% of the people who worked on Remake. When it goes from 16 to 17, most likely they will completely alter the team and it won't be anywhere near what we saw with 16. And I think a lot of that has to do with them really having to shake up Final Fantasy in general, and you don't want these numbered entries to feel too similar to each other. So I do think 17 will feel quite a bit different, and yeah, that probably means different people leading the way, not necessarily Yoshi P, who has had success obviously with Final Fantasy 14, but based on how you've used 16, may not have liked the direction that he took the game in. That said, I think it makes a lot of sense for Square Enix to continue exploring other avenues to release this game on. PC coming up, I think that will do pretty well for the game. I think when we see these games go to PC, they do get a nice spike, obviously nice big push in sales, but now we have things like the Steam Deck or the ROG Ally, different PC handhelds that just opens it up to even wider audience. And 16 is a game that I think will look really, really good on PC. It's just, unfortunately on PS5, running into the situation, especially with Square recently, where the performance mode isn't great, and then the graphics mode looks good, but it's capped at 30 frames, and it just feels slow. This is a game that I would want to revisit on PS5 Pro, but if the PC version's out first, there you go, you pick that up. However, after the PC version, they would not disband. They would apparently stay together and move to other platforms. Xbox makes the most sense, as we see Phil Spencer up on stage with the CEO, president at Square Enix, and Yoshi P all shaking hands and stuff. So I think Xbox, yes, that's most likely the big platform that's going to, but what if they actually got this thing onto Nintendo's next system in like 2 years or something? That also wouldn't shock me if they felt like they were able to make that happen. I guess they could also be looking around at different streaming platforms. I mean, you look at GeForce Now, and of course that will just pull from your Steam library, but I don't know, Amazon Luna, I guess, I mean, Stadia's not around anymore. Maybe they're looking at the iPhone thinking, oh, in like a year or two, maybe the iPhone will be to the point as Death Stranding is on my iPhone, Resident Evil 4 is, maybe we could get Final Fantasy 16 there, and the iPhone 4 hopefully doesn't just melt, or the iPhone doesn't just hopefully melt in your hand, but something to definitely keep an eye on here. With the PC version coming up, most likely should get a demo, all that here, I'd say in the next couple of months. What's next? Is it Xbox? Or do they randomly show up on stage for Nintendo when they present their system? They go, yeah, 16 is going to be here as well. Next up, let's talk about a remake that seems to be coming to us from Sega as they pull from a game more than 20 years ago that I'm sure many Sonic fans who were around at that time, leaving the Dreamcast to maybe the GameCube for Sonic Adventure or going over to Xbox for Jet Set Radio Future, will remember, I feel like, fondly, but it certainly was a bit different than what we had with Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. And that, of course, is Sonic Heroes. Now, this was originally posted up, and I looked and I said, we'll see. But then we had some corroboration come in that I do genuinely believe is correct then. But we can see this is posted up over on Universo Nintendo, who says Sega continues to work to expand its portfolio of re-releases for more modern platforms with the most varied games and IPs in its catalog. This is in a publication made by Zippo about the company focusing on having its next titles on Unreal Engine as they point towards, yes, Sonic Heroes as getting a re-release, a remake. In fact, according to Necro Felipe over on Universal Nintendo, they're pointing towards 2025 as a release timing for it, or at least release window. Anyway, over on X, we had some responses come in as this news was going around, And go figure, Midori was there in the replies as they say this is correct information, but there is not Sonic Adventure remakes right now. Okay, so when Midori shows up and talks about Atlas or Sega stuff, I completely believe that it's correct. And I think they have some pretty serious ties to Sega and Atlas. I'm not gonna expand on that too much here, but I think they know what's going on there is what I'll say. And also, the tag of no Sonic Adventure remakes is disappointing enough to be true. So now I fully believe that there is a Sonic Heroes remake coming next year. I think it's going to be on Nintendo's next system, as well as all the platforms. It's just Sega being there early on in the Switch successor's life, and I think Sonic Heroes will do well on Nintendo's next system, and probably pretty well on other platforms also. If you don't remember this one, it was interesting. It was, again, back when just a few years removed from Sega leaving the console market, and it was a different kind of Sonic game, I guess, but it also came out right at the beginning of 2004. It was like the first week of January on the GameCube, then a few weeks later it came out on other platforms. In fact, in Japan, it came out December 30th or 31st, a day before the year ended, so like a week after Christmas. It was odd timing back then for some of these releases, but Sonic Heroes isn't necessarily one that I look back on and go, oh, that was it. Usually it's Sonic Adventure 2 that, I think many of us think back to that time and go, yeah, that 3D Sonic game, well, maybe it hasn't aged the best now. That first level, though, when you're snowboarding down like the city streets and stuff, and the big truck, that it was mind-blowing stuff then. So hey, I'd be interested to see a new version of Sonic Heroes built in Unreal Engine 5 next year for multiple different platforms, including Nintendo's next system, but we'll see when Sega is ready to announce something like that. But it wouldn't shock me, as we're seeing Sega go back now and get a lot of their older intellectual properties to revive them and older titles to remake them. Next up, let's talk about a big update for Dragon's Dogma 2, as of course conversation has been continuing along about this game online. Capcom, I'm sure, is taking note as to ways they can improve the game, and in fact, many of these things that they are outlining here are things that have just come up in just online discussion, which we can see this is posted up over on their official X account. Starting at the top, updates for all platforms, PS5, Xbox Series, and Steam. I'll go over some of the bigger ones here. Adding the option to start a new game when save data already exists, so you can, I guess, overwrite your save and start over again. It's interesting that is something that has to be added through a patch, but there we go. Making the quest that allows players to acquire their own dwelling where they can save and rest available earlier in the game. Moving over to the PS5 and Xbox Series specifically, adding the option to switch motion blur on or off in options, and adding the option to switch ray tracing on and off in options. Now, they do have a little star next to it, and as they outline here, these options will not affect the frame rate significantly. Frame rate improvements are planned for future updates. So we know with this game, through tons and tons of benchmarks and testing that's happened online, it's very dependent on not only your CPU, but also where you are at the time. Specifically, when you're in town, the game just gets pummeled. So maybe that's, I guess, an area they can work to improve, especially here on consoles that just frame rates all over the place. Adding the option to set frame rate to either variable or max 30 FPS in options. That's something I was a little surprised wasn't there at the start, because of the fact that the game is seemingly resting between 30 and 40 FPS out in the field. Probably wouldn't be a bad idea to just turn that max 30 FPS on to try to smooth things out as much as possible. So at least that'll be a good improvement when they get that out there. Updates for Steam include improving quality when DLSS Super Resolution is enabled, and fixing an issue where models appeared low quality under some specific settings. Now, they don't mention when any of these updates are going to be pushed out and go live. They just say near future. So I'd like to think that these are things we'll see most likely in the coming month. But outside of that, they then have to continue working on just the performance of this game, as they say really none of this stuff is going to affect the frame rate very much. So that seems to be a whole thing on its own, and this might be a game that I keep looking at it, trying to figure out what system I would pick it up on, and I kind of feel like I'm in this limbo state where I'm waiting to see where the improvements are going to be the most significant, where I should get it. I feel like PC right now is the way to go, but I don't know, maybe Capcom can figure some stuff out and all of a sudden it's a clean, smooth 30, or maybe even they tap the 40 FPS mode for 120 Hz displays with this game, but it just needs a lot of work, it seems, and even on PC, I'm unsure how that's going to perform. So we'll see going forward if we get more and more of these updates, but at least these ones, again, good start, and we'll just have to keep an eye out for when they drop. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about the FTC taking on Apple in a new lawsuit, and this seems to be heavily targeted on the idea of Apple doing everything they can to keep people within their ecosystem in their quote-unquote walled garden. Now, we can see this is posted up. This is over on Wired, who says the U.S. Department of Justice, along with more than a dozen state attorneys general, has filed a lawsuit against Apple that takes direct aim at the iPhone and the company's lucrative iOS ecosystem, claiming that Apple had established an iPhone monopoly. The suit argues that the company's allegedly anti-competitive behavior resounds well beyond smartphones themselves. It cites financial services, fitness, gaming, media, and more as industries affected by Apple's walled garden approach. And it's a little more, it's more than 80 pages in terms of this lawsuit. And it is interesting to see how much of it is focused around the green bubbles versus the blue bubbles, and how there's even peer pressure out there, specifically with teenagers. If you don't have an iPhone, you're kind of messing up the group chat. I'm a bit older. I don't know if that is a thing necessarily in high school right now, but based on what I remember back in the day where it was very focused around what shoes you were wearing, I don't doubt any of this. But it is interesting to consider with Apple and their walled garden approach, especially when it comes to maybe other storefronts that would exist on iOS. As we know, Microsoft has been making a big push to try to have their own Xbox marketplace there. And we know that they went back and forth over their cloud streaming service and how Apple didn't necessarily want to have that really just as one application. They wanted each and every game to be separated so they could collect microtransactions that go through the cloud streaming application. And for gaming, that's going to be the big thing, is how does this work out for Microsoft, technically Sony, maybe Nintendo, if they want to have their own storefronts on, really a massive user base with iOS and these iPhones in the future. We see these companies moving heavily over to phones, as obviously there's a lot of money to make there. We just talked about Monopoly Go making tons and tons of money. You feel like a lot of these companies understand and look at that as just an avenue for more revenue to come in. But in order to do that, you have to play by Apple's rules, who've been very, very restrictive, just all the way around, as they mention things like even payment processing, the Apple Watch, which is specific to the iPhone, and just a lot of things too. Once you get in, you don't really want to get out of the Apple setup, the ecosystem. So I'll be following along with this just to see what happens here, especially with Discovery and really the outcome, because if it ends up weakening the walled garden approach, that could also splinter off into other sectors, whether it's Microsoft, Sony, or Nintendo. We'll see. A lot of this is dependent on how this entire lawsuit shakes out, but that should be something that's definitely worth following, especially for gaming, but also just the tech industry overall. And before we go to the comments of the day, we're going to take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, have you ever owned an iPhone? I didn't want to necessarily put up, or do you have an iPhone now? I'm just curious as to how many people have been into the ecosystem, and maybe you've escaped since then, but 64% of people have owned an iPhone at some point, 36% have not. And you know what? I'm actually one of the 36%. I've never owned an iPhone personally. I've worked on many of them, which, yes, technically I've had to use them then, but I've never actually bought an iPhone or got one on contract for 2 years or whatever. So that is something that would be a new concept to me, to be using iOS and iPhone. And it's funny because I do have a MacBook Pro, and I actually use that quite a bit, but it actually replacing my Android phone, have not gone down that path yet. And again, I'm a little concerned because it does seem like something where I have a MacBook Pro, then I have an iPhone, and then you get AirPods involved, and like it's a rabbit hole you go down and you don't climb back out of. And we'll finish up with the comments of the day. We'll start with this one here. This is posted up from Elma's Heavy, who says, every time de novo DRM has been implemented in a game, it always ruins the performance of the game, the frame rate, and many other issues. Yeah, it's pretty common with de novo. I think people have even called onto this where it's like, hold on a minute. There's a good chance that de novo is what's causing many of these issues. Or at least, like, generally de novo gets removed, and we've seen, I'm not even kidding, like 20 or 30% increase in terms of performance and frames per second. Just the amount of checks and different things that Denuvo does in the background can really hold up a lot of these games, and that a lot of times is where some of that stuttering comes from. There have been many cases of this in the past, and because the game gets cracked, a lot of people who are just pirating the game online who don't have that Denuvo attached have a much better experience. So that's the problem with a lot of these games now, is the paying customer has a worse experience than the people who are just taking the game for free. So that, I understand this must work for Capcom, Denuvo. It has to. They have some kind of cost analysis that they've weighed out for years now, and that's come up with, okay, Denuvo works, but eventually they remove it anyway, so it's just annoying that early adopters and people who pay for the game end up having the worst experience. And then we'll go to a comment from the members video. This we can see is from 9 Arachna, who says, makes me a bit more nervous if the Maze Runner guy is doing the movie with the way those movies went. That being said, I did think the first movie was good, enjoyed the second to an extent, wouldn't say it was good, and then there was the third movie. So, the thing with the Zelda movie, where I understand what you're saying about the Maze Runner, yeah, but in this case, Miyamoto will be involved, and this is a big deal for Nintendo that I feel like they want to make sure they get right, so they'll do test screenings, that sort of thing, and I feel like they'll at least get it to a point where it's a fun movie. Like, the Mario movie isn't one that I would go, okay, obviously it's gonna go win an Oscar for best movie, but it was just a fun time, and I feel like that's similar to what we're gonna see from Zelda, although you feel like the Zelda series would be a bit more dramatic with sort of the plot and the setup that they've had throughout all of these games and how it would adapt to a big screen. But that's the biggest part for me now, is the direction, how the movie's gonna look, the rating for it. Are they gonna try to make it as family friendly as possible? Are they gonna get a little darker with it? So a lot of questions still around this one. And ladies and gentlemen, that's gonna do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. Where's Final Fantasy 16 going to other platforms? You think they're just talking about the Xbox, or could they also be talking about Nintendo's next system? And then also, what about a Sonic Heroes remake? Do you like the idea of that? Did you play it back when it first came out? And what we're seeing right now with the FTC taking on Apple, what do you think the outcome's going to be of all of that? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.